Thank you very much, gentlemen. Dr. Izquierdo, I was wondering, I teach civics, 7th grade civics, and students have to learn the Bill of Rights. They have to memorize the first 10 amendments. With your fondness for the 9th Amendment, something that really stands out is students often get really confused about both the 9th and 10th Amendments. With your fondness for the 9th Amendment, how would you differentiate it from the 10th Amendment? If the 10th Amendment promises powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution to the states and the people, why is the 9th Amendment a necessary addition as well?
Great question, and it's one of the things that 7th and 8th graders, it's wonderful that you're approaching them with that. So one of the things about the Bill of Rights is the first gate, and I do teach it this way to my students when I once heard it, that the late Justice Scalia said that they're kind of best understood as things that would hold a tyrant at bay. So the 9th and 10th have another kind of capacity to them. They're structural. So in a famous 20th century court decision, Supreme Court decision, somebody says that the 10th Amendment is a truism and the 9th Amendment. What they're trying to sort of say is in case you missed anything about how our constitutional structure works, the 9th, if we're telling you we have all of these rights, the intuition would be, that's why I sort of said if I have a recommendation letter and I say two bland compliments, what's the intuition from it? What's the inference? So the inference of that, so the inference could normally be that these are the only things protected. One of the ways I like to explain it is back when I used to live in California and I taught in the Bay Area this same subject. Imagine California, Canada, California into Mexico, and you have Asia, right? And you have in the middle Hawaii. You have other little lines, but let's say just Hawaii, right? The presumption of liberty, which my colleague Andrew Humphreys just spoke about, for the founders, it's reflected in the 9th Amendment in this way. The founders understood that what the national government could do was really what Hawaii is. And the presumption of liberty is all the water. Go look at a map, it's immensely huge, right? So what happens is, and this is what is always fascinating about constitutional law, during the 30s and 40s, with the New Deal and the Revolution, you have a presumption of liberty really traded out for what all first-year law students understand as the presumption of constitutionality. And what's the difference? The difference is that now government, both at the state and national level, is presumed that what they do is constitutional. Now the burden, the presumption now falls on the individual. The 9th Amendment was trying to sort of say, and this is why I think it's so creative and ingenious and brilliant by James Madison. He's saying, just in case you think those are everything, there are these other rights. Well, what are these rights retained by the people? They are our natural rights. That's why, I always say to people, I tell my class on the first day, what are your most important rights? And dutiful, great students that they are, they'll say First Amendment or something like that. I was so what have you written your member of Congress or your mayor or protested? 0. It's they're good students, but they're that's kind of making my point. These are kind of safeguards against a kind of tyrannical sort of regime. So the 9th is just sort of saying we are a natural rights republic. Now I think what has happened is basically the following. During the New Deal and this massive aggregation from the Commerce Clause, the diminishment of the 14th Amendment, and for example, contract is not really recognized after 1954, 55 with Williamson v. Lee Optical. And so you have all of this kind of massive power, both the federal and state sort of governments. The 9th is kind of this is why I discussed it as a talk today. It's kind of tapping you on the shoulder. This is what we were. And this is a little wisp of that. Now the 10th, just in 2 seconds, the 10th sort of does the same thing, but just sort of says, all right, we can't get this off the ground. We're starting from a League of Friendship, which is the Articles of Confederation. Travel is much less restricted. It's a quick example of that. Most of the delegates who go to Philadelphia from the South have never been north of Philadelphia. These are the well-educated aristocrats. Most of the delegates from north of Philadelphia haven't gone south, of Philadelphia. Travel is difficult. Like today, there are probably some people who are going to be in another state today, either by highways or airplanes or any kind of sort of thing. So they really thought of themselves as, kind of belonging to the state. And the great innovation, and I think what our prior panels today were saying, is like the key to federalism, which is an authentic American federalist invention, is that we're going to divide sovereignty like between these two. And it was like, necessity is the mother of invention. Necessity was the mother of this political invention, because I don't think it would have come out. So I think like your intuition is perfect, as just like you could explain. One's about natural rights, and one is about all these rights. Hey, national government in the 10th. If you don't have these are reserved to the states or to the people. And it's just like, it's nothing new. It's like, it's just saying, in case any of this was confusing, this is the structure of our government. So, wonderful question, by the way. Cheers.
Hello again. I do have one question for Dr. Humphreys, and it's a bit of a loaded question, so hopefully it's not too much. But obviously, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations is considered somewhat of a piece of the canon in Western civilization literature. And if I understand your presentation correctly, it's that he proposed that there is a somewhat empathetic and humane capacity towards capitalism. And during your presentation, I was thinking of the somewhat infamous quote by Elon Musk, the greatest weakness to Western civilization is empathy. So I'm wondering what has happened to the concept or the appearance of capitalism where it's lost this empathetic quality? Have we somehow been removed from the Smithian roots, so to speak?
I don't know what Musk was talking about, so I maybe won't comment on it. But just thinking about the problem of the speculator holding on to the grain, I think we know what's going on. I think we can imagine what it's like to be that person, and maybe Adam Smith's identification of sympathy is not a direct perception. It's a faculty of imagination in the sympathizer. We don't know what's going on in other people. We project what we think is going on in other people, what we think we would be like in their circumstance. So actually we can be very wrong if we don't have good feedback. And maybe we don't know how to interact with people who are far from us, but we might think we're really good at it. So we really cannot judge the propriety or impropriety, merit, demerit of individuals' actions whom we do not know well. And we deal with people and rely on people we can't observe. So we must be our moral judgment has to be on the second two sources. And then the second is perhaps the deep empathy that we could feed people right now. And it's true, but it's a half-truth. The truth is that the greater amount of food that they get today comes at the expense of food later. And Smith kind of identifies and documents that not allowing the system of private property and prices to work forms famines out of what otherwise would have been dearths. So just the process of self-interest as harmonized by institutions, the institutions of property, contract, and prices, tend to cause the entrepreneur to do what is in the interests of those who otherwise would starve, not necessarily out of benevolence. He may not even understand that's the effect of his actions. He may be just, Ebenezer Scrooge. He just wants to dive into the money. I don't know. But it's really good that there's food at the end of the season. But it may be that person is really motivated by helping and understands the market system and really actually fights their internal desire to give the people the food now. And says, I took an economics class and it's so painful. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the greater profits from my speculation and I'm going to give it to charity. But I have to charge a higher price because if I don't, things go badly. The point is that the market does not require the motives to make the effect work. But following the rules and thinking about there has to be a dedication to the rules of justice, even when it seems like there might be more humane things. And so perhaps if you're really thinking in the first and second source of propriety and merit, of empathizing with those people, and you only have a part of the picture, you're going to create problems at the systemic level. And actually Smith has a story of how we start by dealing with our neighbors but we have ever expanding circles of sympathy. And actually the highest is universal benevolence. It's the most proper. And the highest sense of impartial spectator is concerned with the welfare of the whole. And so that fourth source of moral approval is, how is the system working for the happiness of the whole, the welfare of the whole? But we actually can destroy the system by emphasizing only the first or second source of moral approval. And on the other hand, so Friedrich Hayek makes this distinction. He says, we actually in a modern world uncomfortably straddle two moral worlds. One is the world of the personal family relations, the ones that we know others, and the other is the impersonal relations of the market. And they're totally inappropriate to each other. If we tried to pay everyone to do everything in the household, all the affections of the family and the nature of the family would be completely destroyed, to be crushed. But on the other hand, if we try to make society like a family, we also destroy it. And so a lot of the moral problem that we have is explaining to people how they can switch their moral code when they're dealing with strangers versus dealing with people in their church, their neighborhood, and their family. And there are many people who want to make society a family. And there are other people who want to make the family just like a market or something like that. And it will destroy both. So we have to kind of straddle these two different criteria for moral judgment.
Dr. Wheatland, if one were interested in diving into the Federalist Papers, but perhaps, or the Federalists, excuse me, but perhaps did not have time to read through 1 through 85, where might one start if we had time to read 5, for example?
Well, you could start with the first one. But actually, seriously, you could start with the first one. And the reason for that is that the first one has this incredible reflection on the nature between reason and passions, and why it is that it's difficult as a public, as a collective, to think about fundamental political problems. Hamilton raises the question that, well, human beings throughout history have not created good governments through reflection and choice. The good governments that have existed, I think he has England in mind especially, they have resulted through accident and force, right? Through centuries essentially of evolution and warfare and institutional arrangements. And Hamilton, as he's writing this first paper, he's making the point that this is because our reason is clouded. It's difficult to accomplish. It's clouded by errors, faultiness. He gets into some of the finer details of this in number 37. But this is also because of our passions. He says there's interests on both sides of the debate, right? There's certain people who are not going to want to support the Constitution because it will be detrimental to their own interests if they're a powerful state legislator, for example. But Hamilton also makes the point, this is sometimes missed, I didn't emphasize it in my talk, is that not all the passions are bad. Some of them, in fact, are complementary to the use of our reason. He says that the inducements of philanthropy and patriotism will convince the greatest minds to take this question seriously and to try to understand it in a dispassionate way in order to properly guide the public. And so there's a moral and political psychology that is laid out. It begins to be sketched out in the first Federalist paper. Number 31 is another one I would go to, which I did quote, is I think that Hamilton's account here, the differences and the relation between math and politics is very useful. Whenever I teach American government and civics, the very first day of class, the very thing I assign to students is the first 3 paragraphs of number 31. That is where we always begin, so that I get them into that topic of how do we know things? How can we understand things? How can we grapple with them through the human mind? Federalist 2 is another one that I think is extremely important, because Federalist 2 talks about how to think about the universal understanding of government, the universal principles, and also your particular circumstances. How can you make those things fit together, right? The American Constitution fits America because of the way that we, as Americans, are constituted. And then to add, I'll go through only 4, that way you don't even have to go through 5. Number 57. Actually, I'll have 55. I'll do 55 and 57. These speak to the questions of human reason in relation to human nature. And in 57 especially is this question of, or is the answer that all political constitutions, their end, their aim is or ought to be to acquire rulers who have the proper wisdom and virtue and to keep them wise and virtuous while they hold office. That is the eternal political problem, regardless of your time and place. All political conflict in some way, or at least this is the perennial problem that we have as human beings, is that those who hold power and authority are often the people who don't know how to use those properly. This is the problem that Plato raises in the 5th book of the Republic when he says that until the kings become philosophers or the philosophers become kings, the cities will never be well organized and they'll never achieve happiness, right? And in our system of government, we recognize that the rule of philosophy of kings is not going to happen. Enlightened statesmen will not always be at the helm, he says in Federalist 10. But we have elections. And in the ancient Greek world, election was thought of as an aristocratic element of government. Aristocratic in the literal sense of the term, meaning the rule of the best. You try to elect, to select those who are best among you to hold positions of authority. And so I think if you take 1, 2, 31, 55, 57, that will give you not an entire element, or not an entire understanding of reason, liberty, and justice in relation to politics, but it will at least give you the outline for it.
Question for Dr. Humphrey that draws on something that Dr. Wheatland just said. I'm wondering how Smith would incorporate kind of those human passions, both as they affect human rationality and human morality. Because when you described sort of the breakdown that Smith gives of sort of the purposes of government, it's basically sounds like it's defense against threats from abroad, defense against threats at home, and coordination problems in order to accomplish works. So you mentioned the situation where there might be like a riot on a ship in order to get food now that is going to be needed later, which is a breakdown of human rationality. It's been a while since I read Wealth of Nations, but I think, if I remember correctly, Smith supports laws that would, for example, limit the rate of interest that you're allowed to charge on a loan. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he also supported things like an established state church for the promotion of morality. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure about that one. How do things like that, if that's an accurate representation of positions that Smith would hold, fall into that breakdown, or is there sort of like a quasi-fourth that he's bringing in to supplement those three?
Well, I think just when Professor Wheatland was talking, I was thinking about Adam Smith's notion that the Wealth of Nations is contributing to the science of the legislature. And he makes distinctions when talking about free trade about what principles are always the case and what principles are contingent. And the first are scientific, and then the second, he says, are properly the domain of the crafty, insidious animal, which is the politician. But he doesn't mean that entirely negatively. He just recognizes that there's this strategic and intelligent and prudent element that also has to be in play because of the changeability of human circumstances. So he's dealing with the science part, but he also recognizes that there's a need for prudence and judgment. In the Theory of Moral Sentiments, he discusses the idea that really what we need is to follow the rules of justice, but that if we do that completely algorithmically, then there will be some gross enormities, that very weird and bad things would happen. But on the other hand, when you empower someone to violate the rules for some higher equity, you endanger the whole system, and so it's actually extremely dangerous, and so it's a problem. And he just recognizes that it is a problem. And then the interesting case of, he did support, at least in Wealth of Nations, the idea of an interest rate cap against usury. There's a famous account from Bentham, who uses Adam Smith's weapons against him, kind of showing that the Smithian theory would completely obliterates the idea of a price cap on interest. And supposedly, the rumor is Adam Smith said, "Good job, Bentham," at the end of his life on some level. And he may have done, Smith was very attentive to his, to not offending people. He really, and the interest issue was just, I think he just didn't want to touch certain things necessarily, and he was happy to just deal with that passion level and not offend it and make political advances in terms of good. And then in terms of the established church, he was very much against it. He was a big fan of American liberty of religion, and his friend David Hume was for established religion. And the case is really interesting because it shows that there are possibilities of a social science where you can agree on cause and effect mechanisms, but disagree about what you want to happen. So they both agreed that if you had established religion, that you would create a monopoly situation where there would be very little interest in the priest or the preacher in catering to the welfare of their parishioners. And Adam Smith thought, that's really bad. You want them to be really interested in the welfare of those people and kind of compete with one another to create the spiritual and material goods that churches can produce for people. And David Hume wanted the church to die. He really wanted people to not care about the church at all. So he wanted people to go to these really boring, Sunday services where there was no incentive to get anyone's attention. So they agreed with the cause and effect relationships, where Adam Smith wanted the kind of church to thrive, change, and help people, and Hume wanted to die. But they thought the cause and effect was the same.
I think we have expired our time for this panel. Please join me in thanking our panel for wonderful comments this afternoon.
Join us in falling in love with America again.